there's a desire to be a part of something healthier, better, more vibrant, and more functional. That's really refreshing to be around. And they're still young enough to believe that meaningful change is possible. Man, the reins are being handed to us in a lot of ways.
Welcome to the Step Up Podcast, where our goal is to help you step up as a man in every area of your life. I'm your host, Dave Kinney, and I'm joined by my pastor, Pastor Chris Kouba.
I think that there's always been a generational barrier. You know, even generations that have come before us, understanding us, understanding the next generation, you know, all sorts of different things, whether it comes to working with them in a corporate setting, parenting them.
You get asked that all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just understanding that next generation in general is something that's never going to go away. And I know that's one of the things that you're really passionate about, is reaching that next generation and influencing them in their leadership and development and all of those things. How have you done that? How have you navigated those waters? Kind of from all of those angles, work and parenting and just relationships, building relationships and all of that.
I think it's key. You have to understand 1 Timothy 4:12 is either true or it's not. Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set the believers an example. So I think we say this phrase here at United City, but I think we really do actually try to live it out. Next is now. Like we don't want to treat you like we're trying to prepare you that one day you could actually have influence, but like try to speak and teach. And I do that with my own kids, but also, you know, the youth of our church, of just like, no, you can have impact right now. In fact, I would argue you could potentially have more impact than anybody else, because the opportunity is there, and just because the access that you have to being around so many different people that you're going to be influenced with. And so I think a lot of it is just speaking to people as though not you will one day matter, but you matter right now.
Regardless, though, there are those people that it just naturally comes to them. It's a tool in their tool belt where they can relate, they can understand, and they can speak to that next generation in a totally new, different way that is really, really deeply impactful. You recently got to sit down with Brian.
Man, I love this guy.
Talk about this conversation.
Yeah, I'm super pumped for y'all to hear this with Brian McCormick, who is the director of Breakaway Ministries. He's become a good friend, and I'm looking forward to a continued friendship, not only with him personally, but just with our church. But I asked him, like, tell me how we can not only understand, how we can reach, but also, I know we got a lot of Gen Z listeners to the podcast. Yeah. What does it look like for you to grow and to step up as a man? Take a listen. You're going to love this with Brian McCormick. All right, man, it is good to be back on the podcast. I got my buddy Brian McCormick. Man, it is good to have you here from the home of Breakaway. Got that in the background there, which is pretty awesome. They're in College Station. How's College Station today?
Oh man, it's a little warmer than I'd like it to be. I'm still adjusting from the move from Seattle, but man, we beat Florida last Saturday. Morale is high in this town.
You guys are flying good, especially after the first of the year, I'm sure. And last night you guys had Breakaway when we're recording this. So tell us how that went.
Oh, it was incredible. We've been going through the book of Acts this year. We did Luke last year, really focusing on Acts this year. And it was week 5. So I preached the first 4, just kind of walking us through Acts 1 and 2. And then I brought in my buddy Joel Mudmale, who's like a theologian, just to talk about the theology of Acts. And we met up in the student center today for about an hour and some change, and invited students just to come and do like open kind of Q&A, like Jesus holding court in the temple. Awesome. I'm having a blast, man. It's so much fun.
Okay. Tell us your story. How did you end up getting to Breakaway, but back all the way up? Where are you from? Sure.
So it's a complicated question. I was born outside Toronto. I was immediately moved to Montreal. So French Canadian background in all those ways. So I was bilingual English, French. We immigrated in the late 80s to Houston, and I grew up in the Woodlands, north of Houston.
Yeah.
And college basketball took me all over the place: East Texas, Southern California, and then finally Seattle. I was a youth pastor in the Woodlands for about 4 years after I graduated. Married my wife in that time, who I met in Seattle, and we started feeling a call to church planting. So we had an opportunity to go up to Seattle, get trained by a large church in the Seattle area, and then planted a church in our apartment living room in the summer of 2012. Wow. And we led that community for about 11 years and started feeling like God was calling us to some kind of transition. weren't quite sure what that was, considered some lead pastor and teaching pastor positions on the West Coast. They just didn't feel like the right fit. And then the opportunity at Breakaway popped up. And from the moment it popped up, we were like, if this is offered to us, this is going to be really tough to walk away from. I'd been deeply impacted by Breakaway over the years.
Yeah.
And it has been everything. We've been here a year and a half now, and it has been everything we had hoped it would be. So,
and the reputation that you have already, and just, I mean, that incredible ministry. I know Greg's a good friend, not only myself of our church, and then of course Ben and TA. There's a big legacy there, man. That's a tough thing to step into. But on the other hand, man, what a foundation. I mean, just an incredible thing. So many Aggies go to our church, and so many folks I know listening. It's just pretty amazing. So tell us a little bit about, because you're getting to be around then every week with this whole Gen Z age group, right? And so, what are some of the common misconceptions that you would say people have of Gen Z?
Right. Well, I say often when I get to travel and speak in churches that the hopelessness of Gen Z has been greatly exaggerated.
Okay.
So I don't know. I think that some of the older generations look down at this generation and they're not quite sure what to do with them, and are quick to kind of brush them off. That dynamic is not really new in intergenerational relationships,
right,
for this one, but
everybody grades up on their own paper when they're grading about their generation.
Sure.
Everybody else is not as good. Right.
Sure. Absolutely. I think that the hopeless, lazy, I just think that what people need to understand is that they are not just the predictable next step in like just common generational transfer. Like I would say, they are open-eyed, and there is hunger in their belly. So like their eyes are open and their bellies are hungry. So they have been watching, and they are watching partisan politics. They're watching like TikTok theology. They're taking it all in. And as much as there is the risk of them just kind of absorbing everything, they are seeing the brokenness in a lot of the things we've relied upon just to make our culture function in 2024. Sure. And they're not just calling it out, and they're not just scorning it all. There's a desire to be a part of something healthier, better, more vibrant, and more functional. That's really refreshing to be around. And they're still young enough to believe that meaningful change is possible. I think they're starting to recognize, like, man, the reins are being handed to us in a lot of ways. So that's the open eyes. And then hungry bellies, man. This is the hungriest, even like within the greater generation. Every generation is about 15 years, according to a sociologist. Even this little pocket of current college students and young adults, there is such hunger for truth. There's hunger for meaning. There's hunger for real relationship. And it's just that's the thing. When people from around the country are like, Brian, what are you doing at a parachurch ministry on campus at like the largest university in the country? Like, what do you see down there? And I just say, I see hunger. Over and over again, that's my answer. I see hunger for things that matter, and getting to be a small part of the feeding mechanism is such a blast.
Well, just the fact that you're talking about how you went through Luke, now you're going through Acts. I mean, they're not looking for fluff, right? I mean, it's not a situation to where that stuff just doesn't last, doesn't do stuff. I mean, these folks went through COVID in a very real way, disrupted. Like, they've seen that everything everybody relied on, you can't be relied on, right? So, I mean, I think in light of that, it's amazing just to consider and think through. There's not just a hunger and openness, there's a hunger for truth, right? I mean, they want to, I mean, I hear all the time about what God's doing on college campuses, and I hear about that happening at Breakaway. I mean, walk me through some of that. Are you guys seeing some of the God activity that just seems to be going all over the place?
100%. And it's, I have to balance two things in sincerity when I have this conversation with people. One is to honor the fact that not just Breakaway has 35 years of fruitful ministry under its belt. God has been doing a peculiar thing in this town called College Station for about that long, that there are local pastors who have been faithfully plowing, who would say, I feel like I've been fishing in a stock pond for 30 years. Like, God has just had his hand on this community in a really peculiar way. So that's true. And I honor that 100%. And I absolutely believe that there's some cool, unprecedented things happening right now, most evidenced by the hunger. And it's not just what students are hungry for. It's what they have lost an appetite for.
That's
and
good.
One of the coolest things I think they've lost an appetite for is celebrity Christianity.
Okay.
Is in an environment, in a huge ministry like mine, or like ours. And for those of the listeners that are still kind of piecing this together, Breakaway is in an arena ministry that meets at the basketball arena of the largest university in the country, an SEC school, and thousands of students coming together. There was probably a time in the life of this ministry where there are certain buttons you can push, certain people you can bring in, certain speakers you could bring in, certain worship leaders you could bring in and cause this like gigantic uptick. That list used to probably be like 10 or 20 names long, that it would kind of create that excitement. There's like one or two now. Like, just students don't care. They do not care about the celebrity thing anymore. Like, do you have truth for me? Can you apply it to my life? Is there hope? Are there answers for my questions? That's exciting to me. That's really exciting. And so we're getting to watch that, is different pockets of opportunity for students to lean in. And I do believe, I think we should be really careful with like words like revival and awakening. I don't think we should be fearful of those words. I think we should be expectant and hopeful for such things in a legitimate sense. But you look throughout church history and the things that are present before those big movements, I see a lot of those things in these students. Just a hunger for repentance, a hunger for truth, a commitment to unity, a desire to bring tangible good to bear on the community, prayerfulness, like a new passion for prayer that I haven't really witnessed in a while. So anyway, I could talk for a long time, obviously, but I do think there's reason to hope for big things with this generation of students.
I do think it's important to clarify. You did mention it because we probably do have some listeners who may not necessarily know what Breakaway is. So you guys met, for instance, the time of this recording, last night in Reed Arena, where the basketball team of Texas A&M University plays their games. Massive arena. How many people were there last night at Breakaway?
I have no idea. We launched this year around 5,000 or 6,000 students a couple weeks ago.
That's amazing.
And we'll see that taper naturally throughout the semester. So I would probably around two to three. I don't even know, but like thousands of students. Yeah.
Point being, this is not just like a little Hartman little Bible study. This is a movement of God that he's been doing for, like you said, 35 years. It's pretty incredible. Okay, let's talk through this though, because this podcast is for men. And so what do you think are the biggest issues facing men that are Gen Z?
Right. I think that I just said that Gen Z is not in its identity just the next generational rung on the ladder, that there are things that feel like a divergence from just a natural trajectory. Sadly, I think there are things that absolutely are that they are the amplification of what we've seen over the last few generations. And so I think that there is a total crisis level lack of clarity on just what it means to be a man. I think that some would be quick to point to gender confusion and those kinds of things, and that is absolutely relevant and important. But I think that if the enemy has done anything really effectively in the last season of American history, is he's tried to take our words from us. Like, we don't even know what words mean anymore.
That's good.
And we don't really know what are reliable sources of truth. So like, a lot of students will recognize, I don't even know what you mean when you say that word. I don't even know how to define that word. And I don't know a reliable source to go find anything anymore. And so that absolutely applies to just what does it mean to be a man? Never mind a biblically faithful, spirit-filled, gospel-minded man.
Sure.
And so you take that, you mash that up with the lingering effects of COVID and isolation. You throw in the spike in mental health issues in this generation. That's all true. And you've just got an isolated group of young men who do not have the social confidence or the pre-existing social channels to even seek out relationships where they can be discipled into understanding who they are and who they're supposed to be and who they could be.
Okay, so men forever, though, have always struggled with sexual sin, right? I mean, that's kind of been all the way back from the beginning. Is there anything unique about it from the perspective of a Gen Z?
I would say yes. I know that I previously said that, hey, listen, Gen Z is not just the natural trajectory of the previous generation's characteristics. I think that there are some ways that is the case here. Like, this is the most porn addicted generation in history. This is the generation that is dealing with even more constant access than ever before, where it's never been easier to circumvent accountability software. Like, there's just a bunch of things that are worse that way for this generation, and the stats reflect that. But there's a bit of a conundrum as well with the statistics. Like, for example, I forget this generation is has twice as many, like, percentage-wise, the percentage is twice as high among Gen Z members who have had 0 sexual partners in the last 12 months. So it's like there's some stats where sexual activity is going down among Gen Z, and there's different theories for what that is. If it's just less social confidence post-COVID, or if it's just a more satisfying life of isolation, like the availability of pornography and gaming and whatever else. It's like, it's not worth the trouble to even try to acquire a sexual partner. But there's some fascinating stats there, and it requires some nuance to even just like dig into what is actually happening in that space. This is crazy though, is that they're so saturated with sexuality and eroticism that when movie studios are doing focus groups of what this particular age group is fascinated by, you're going to start seeing more movies about close friendships that apparently they think that's like a novelty, which makes a lot of sense when you think about the quirks of this generation and the challenges they're facing, that they are fascinated by close friendship. And you're like, oh, please, Lord, let that pendulum swing back
for sure.
in mass media and such. But yeah, they're a bit of a conundrum, and they're worth leaning in to appreciate the nuances.
Okay, that's the bad. What's the good? Like, what's the biggest opportunity when you look at a Gen Z guy? If you had a chance to sit down with him and say, hey, man, here's what I think could be the case for you, what would you say?
Sure. I think you have to double back. Like, there's an opportunity to be a part of what God is stirring right now. There's an opportunity. I think that the greatest opportunity never changes, and this cannot get old to us as Christian men.
So good.
The biggest questions Gen Z is asking all find their answers in the gospel. Like, that's timeless, and it's especially true right now. And I think that if we have older men that are capable of giving gospel answers to the biggest questions Gen Z has, discipleship is going to take off like a rocket. We tend to focus on the fact that Jesus saves, which is true, and there's forgiveness for your sin, and that always has to be the front door. We never replace that. But there's a generation asking, like, am I going to make it through this madness? Yeah. Like, just the crazy of the season. Like, you get to say, yeah, Jesus sustains. Let me tell you about that part of the gospel. Or can porn addicted, recovering from abuse, apathetic people like me, is there hope that we can actually change? And it's like, yeah, Jesus sanctifies. Let's talk about that part of the gospel. Or is a fulfilled life even possible? Because I am swiping left, swiping right, changing vice or addiction every single day, week as necessary. Yeah, Jesus satisfies. Like, that's part of the gospel. And then all the way to like the most timeless question in the history of history, like, does my life have purpose or meaning? Yes, Jesus wants to send you. He wants you to be a part of what he's doing in the world. And this generation of men is no different than the boomers, than Gen X, than millennials. Like, we just want something to bleed for. Like, just give me something to live, die, and bleed for. And all those gospel answers are found, in Jesus, which is just wonderful. And so if a generation of men can take hold of those things, they're overqualified to be a part of what could be the next great awakening. I was in a meeting room at Asbury a couple months ago, and was honored to be there, but it was people who from around the States and a couple people from Europe, one from South America, about 30 of us in all, that were gathered just to answer the question, hey, you guys have a unique view of what's happening with Gen Z. Will you share? And can we honestly and sincerely and prayerfully try to discern if we think that we might be on the cusp of a new great awakening? And
we'll let it be. Yeah.
And the conclusion of that table, and I can say with confidence, that was not a foregone conclusion of that crew. the conclusion of that table over 2 days of prayer and seeking the Lord and sharing stories was, yeah, we choose to believe that based off of data and stories and our hopes, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that this generation is starting to believe that they might get to be a part of something that their parents and grandparents have been praying for.
Okay. Talk me through this. So I'm a dad of 4 teenagers. I've got one going to college next year. I've got more coming. Like, you see in some sense all the time there on a college campus, the effects of either dads who like crushed it and did it well, who stepped up, and like, you can just tell like, okay, God either did a radical work in your life or he may have done it through your dad. Like, you can kind of see that. Or I would assume you maybe see the opposite, to where you can see daddy wounds or father issues or those types of things. Like, what would you tell a dad that may be listening who's got a Gen Z boy or girl, really? Let's just go with both, parent. Like, what advice would you give them as to what they can do so they can raise up men or women who will get it and be a part of what God's stirring up and not go the opposite direction?
Yeah, it's a mashup of declaration and demonstration. And I think that be constantly declaring, be constantly telling them who they are to you, who they are to God, their great value, like just these baseline timeless questions, speaking that over them constantly. Because even when you think you're overdoing it, you're not coming close minute to minute, hour to hour comparison of what they're hearing from the world and what they're hearing from scrolling. So it's like, overdo it. It's almost like basic marketing or basic leadership of a team. Like, you don't know that you've really communicated a core value until your team starts rolling their eyes at you. Like, we know, like, I know that I'm a child of God, Dad. Like, I know you love me no matter what, but it's like, who cares? Plow right into and through that to where it's just drilled into their head, those simple declarations. Tell them who they are. And as much as just like a floating identity, you are a child of God. You are a saint. You are all, all those things. More than a floating identity, they need to know what is their role and in whose story are they? Like, whose story are they in? Yeah. And I think like showing them their place in the story of God and like what they get to be a part of, following Jesus with their everything, and how that is so much better than any story you can write for yourself. Yeah. That's another thing to declare, but as important, if not more important, is the demonstration. It is so beautiful to watch a 19-year-old that I talked to on the arena floor after Breakaway dismisses, and to be 20 seconds in and be like, oh, you know who you are, and you know that there's a mission for your life, and you have like this passion for the things of God, and I didn't do that. Like, and you dig this much, and it's like, yeah, that was my parents. Like, they showed me a compelling life. Like, to talk to a 19-year-old who can say, I remember walking into my dad's bedroom and seeing him on his knees praying at the bed. And I remember like dad hustling home and like spending some time with us so he could go get some Bible study with the guys he was meeting with. Like, I remember the family vacation that we usually took that got canceled because we went to like go serve the global poor. Like, demonstrating and being about it, giving those categories, declare predictable things and just demonstrate simple devotion. And it's like, it's not complicated. Yeah. It's hard to carry it out. Life is hard. We're all busy. Yeah. We're all insecure, but it's not a difficult roadmap. It's just like choosing to walk it.
Yeah. And what's crazy is you don't have to be perfect. Like, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just got to show effort in the right direction a little bit. And like what you're describing, that dad that is on his knees praying, I guarantee it's because he did it long before he was trying to do it whenever his son saw him. Right. I mean, it's just part of who he was, and it's just kind of continually walking towards the Lord. You and I have talked about this a little bit. We've both benefited and are benefiting. We're in the middle of it right now, greatly from a resource John Tyson put out called The Primal Path. In fact, I actually did an episode earlier about my initiation trip that I took with my 13-year-old, and it was really inspired by Primal Path. Tell us a little bit about that resource. How have you personally been able to use that, and what's that kind of look like for you?
Absolutely. So Primal Path is a resource written by John Tyson that starts on the 13th birthday and typically runs till like their 19th birthday, I think.
Yeah.
Starts with an initiation. It really majors on the fact that most of Western Christianity culture is completely devoid of rites of passage.
Yep.
And we're largely the first civilization in human history that's true of, which is terrifying. And so it's just reclaiming that, trying to create moments that are memorable. And then in between, like a huge moment of welcome to manhood at 13 and a huge moment of like, I'm proud of you and I'm sending you out to do the same at 19. It's just the beauty of consistency, of simple discipleship, of trying to navigate what Tyson calls the 5 great shifts of like, boys do this, but men do this. Boys think this way, but men think this way. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's revolutionary because it's not complicated. And it's filling the precise gap that not just American culture, but that most of American Christian culture is experiencing in those spaces. I cannot recommend it enough. It's led to some really beautiful moments of like confession and repentance for my son that might have saved his life. Like, like in terms of if that hadn't come out. And I'm so proud of him and so thankful to John. It's well worth any father's time, period.
Yeah, it is. They've also got a one he just released for daughters, raising daughters, I think is maybe the title of it. And so it's kind of just what I think I found is that, like I had a great dad. My dad's awesome. My dad was there for me. My dad modeled a lot of this. But like if you didn't have one, what you just said about declaring but also demonstrating, and you're like, man, I don't know if I know what to do. I think that Primal Path just kind of gives you some building blocks to where, man, you're just a little bit ahead in the material that you walk through. I'm sure you feel the same way I do. Half the time I read it and I'm like, man, I need to do this stuff. Like this is for me. I just happen to be mentioning it to my boys. Okay, let me shift for a second. What advice would you give somebody who is Gen Z listening to this podcast right now on how they can thrive spiritually?
Right. I don't feel the need to customize spiritual thriving footsteps for Gen Z. I think that timeless questions should have timeless answers. And like, how do I thrive in my and we can like modify the application of those things a little bit, but the 4 words I just give them as they try to be a disciple are gospel, worship, community, and mission. Just what is the good news? What is the gospel? And how will you believe it more as you grow? And how will you live it out more as you grow? How do you make your entire life a life of worship? How do you do everything you do in community as much as possible? And then how do you live as a part of God's mission? Those are the 4 words I put on repeat. And honestly, it sounds counterintuitive and almost heretical for people in Gen Z, where I believe the enemy's even more so specialized agenda for Gen Z is isolation. And there are a lot of things he's celebrating when it comes to isolation over the last 5 years. I actually push them towards community. Doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about gospel, of course, but like I push them towards community, like finding biblical community that you can trust and that you can walk with it's so much harder for the enemy to swoop in and kind of take away the good things that someone in Gen Z is learning if there's actually community in place first. So when it's the first couple of weeks of the semester, I'm like, what's your name? That's incredible. What did God do in your life? Amazing. Have you found your people yet?
Yeah.
Like, have you found your church yet? Find your people is step 1. Yeah. I'm curious if that would resonate in you, Chris, but.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, and I don't, what I think is interesting specifically, you think through the college student, but even go back high school, that kind of thing. I mean, I've told my kids this multiple times, like it's the easiest it'll ever be to find it right now. Because in some sense, there's built-in mechanisms for you to be around people in a good way. Whereas as you get older, we know this, we got kids, we got whatever else, you tend to just drift away from that natural community. I think you need it just as much as you always have, but it's just not as easy. So I would tell you, press in now, building these rhythms to where, yes, you're connecting and you're getting around other people who, I say it's not just that you're accountable to, that you're accountable with. Find people that are running hard towards Jesus and go run up next to them. Right. So it's not a matter of getting there and saying, hey, did you look at stuff this week? Or did I look at stuff this week? Did I read my Bible? That's helpful, but it's really like, I want to find somebody who's trying to crush being their marriage right now. I want to find somebody who's trying to crush being a dad. This is why you and I resonated so much, I think, on this Primal Path stuff, because we're both trying to crush it as dads, and we're trying to make our sons and raise up in that. And so there's an immediate connection on that. So I think sometimes we kind of view it sort of like it's I'm dating. Who do I connect? Do I like them? I like this person in the group. I don't like this person in the group. And I think that's the wrong question. It's instead, who's running hard after Jesus? Who knows who they are? Who's trying to make sure to make a difference and understand their greater purpose in the world? Get in the group with those people. It's just really, I don't mean it to oversimplify it, but I do think sometimes you make it harder than it should.
So good. I think that a way that I've started talking about accountability, I heard a man much wiser than myself recently say, there are a significant measurable number of Christian men who have people holding them accountable to their behavior and not nearly enough holding them accountable to their calling, who they're called to be in the world. So that what if, when we heard the word accountability, we didn't immediately think like, you're going to ask me, did I look at this? Did I follow through with this? But just like, hey, my role in your life is to remind you who you are and like what God said that one time. Like when things became clear of like your place in the story. I think we all long for that. And so few men actually have that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Let me end on this. We've seen it at our church in every way. Gen Z has transformed our church. We are growing like crazy in Gen Z. We prioritize it in every single way. And we just feel like it brings both an energy and excitement, and also just a vision for our church that is just contagious. How have you, as you look at the landscape overall of Gen Z, how do you see them impacting the church?
Gosh, I think that the most vibrant churches I know of around the country, Gen Z is leading the way.
Yeah, it's good.
Doesn't mean they're preaching every Sunday. Doesn't mean, that they're the executive pastor. But they're leading the way of just a life passionately lived for the gospel. And I think that as I get more specific than just that generality, like I see Gen Z rejecting wholesale, like disunity. Like I think that they just don't have they have no tolerance for it. And I see them passing over old denominational dividing lines and political dividing lines. I see them in the name of mission and family of God. Like they're leading people across that. And this is true of youth in general, but there's something special on this generation. I just choose to believe it. They believe change is possible.
That's good.
They still believe that. Like when you preach to them, Chris, and you say that the gospel is for anyone and everyone, and God has a plan for all nations, and it doesn't matter what you've done. They're not nodding saying I remember that's cute. The way they're like, well, okay, well, let's go then. Like they still feel that, man. It's incredible to be around. And I think I'll say this, that one of my favorite churches here in town is led by my friend Philip, and he's newer to this, 130, I forget how old, like well over 100 years old Baptist church. Incredible, beautiful legacy up here in the Bryan College Station area. He's about 4 years into leading it. And I don't know how long it took him to change the mission statement, but their mission statement is every generation reaching the next generation. It's like, and he finds a way to make it to where gets everyone on the same page. Like, I need all of us to not care about things that don't matter, and all rally around these college students and these high school kids and these middle school kids, and like Alpha coming right behind Gen Z. I get so pumped by that because no one gets left out. Everyone's like, well, what about us? And what about our generation? Like, no. We're all unified we're laying down our preferences to go all in for them. Yeah. And I think a culture that's that sold out, man, like is just destined to have front row seats to whatever God is doing with this generation.
Yeah. What I've discovered is that a church that focuses on the next generation gets every generation. If a church doesn't focus on the next generation, I think that they become one generation church. And I've seen it over and over and over again. But I mean, in ours, we got some folks here that may not love the music, and they may not love the volume, and they may not love the chaos that the youth provides on a Wednesday night when they take over the whole worship center. But what I have found is, man, they really love it whenever the baptism waters are moving, because kids are getting saved and they're bringing their friends and they're going and sharing their faith at school. At the end of the day, that wins the day, and they want to be a part of a church that's growing. And so there's no question about it. Well, man, thank you for what you do. Like I said, I'm not an Aggie. I got my Baylor right behind me here. We're Sick and Bears for sure. But I appreciate, man, how God is using you. Breakaway is not just something that is incredible. It's a Bible study that takes place on the campus of A&M. It sets the pace across the country for so many Bible studies that are trying to be like Breakaway, that want to be like Breakaway, but also just in terms of the move of God in the next generation and in college students. And man, just know that United City is behind you and for this ministry. We love those who've gone before you, and we're very, very excited about the fact that you're now here praying for your family, as well as you can just continue to lead. And so just any final words you'd give us?
Gosh, I think that you nailed it those last 2 minutes. I think that the generations that go all in for the next generation, they reach all of them. And then you said that the ones that don't become a one generation church. And the thing in my head that flashed to mind, I was like, and that one generation church becomes a none generation church pretty quick. But man, so much hope and excitement, and honored to talk to you, Pastor. Like, just inspired by your church, and yeah, appreciate the time.
Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Man, there's so much wisdom packed into one conversation.
There's a lot there.
I mean, he is the man.
It's great.
He is like the connection to that next generation, which a couple things I learned is, one, you have to have those people in your life that are experts in a field, and you can go to them for wisdom and advice and all of that. What an amazing guy. What stands out most to you? What's your key takeaway from that conversation?
I love it. He said specifically, Gen Z men, if you want to step up as a man, get a part of what God is stirring. I think we see that. We see really a great movement of young adults in our church, and the next generation, our youth, it's a priority of ours. But we're seeing baptisms like crazy. We're seeing folks step up being called to ministry. I think we're seeing the stirring that he's referring to, and that you kind of see on college campuses, and that you feel like you're seeing in different places. And I would just simply encourage any listener that is here, any dad of a Gen Z person, believe big for your kids. I mean, I think about that for my own, man. I want my kids to be a part of what God is clearly doing across the country. And I believe he's doing in Northeast Houston for us, and press in on that. And so if you're a listener today, man, don't sit on the sidelines, evaluate, investigate, judge, whatever. Get involved, and see how God's going to use you to be a part of what he's stirring across the country.
Yeah, don't allow the generational divide to be divisive, but cross that divide and be the man of God that you've been called to be. It's so special. We want to introduce all of our listeners to Brian and more people like him.
So great.
We're going to put his social media handles into the show notes. Please follow him. A lot of wisdom from that guy. It's also really, really fun to be able to introduce our listeners to some of our friends and connections and all of that. We've got a few more of those coming up, which is really, really exciting. So thanks so much for listening to the Step Up Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Step Up Podcast. Do us a favor and like, subscribe, and share this episode to help us get the word out. We would love to hear from you, so please leave us a comment and even leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. For additional information or to reach out directly, please visit chriskouba.com. That's chriskouba.com. You can follow Pastor Chris on social media and just search Chris Kouba, Kouba. You can also follow United City Church on all socials at United City Church. That's UNTD City Church. Thanks so much.